Worked every other time I plugged it in.
Well, if you put your damn headphones on, it wouldn't be a problem.
I'm claustrophobic.
Oh my goodness! For all the people that are watching on the YouTube live,
and I only know one sign in sign language.
Yeah, we all know that one. we all know that one. Yeah, y'all missed something. I swear to God, if you'd have just put your headphones on, it wouldn't have been an issue. But that's all right. That's all right. We're good. By the way, Dean, I talked to Yvonne. I gave her the credit card, and she said if she sees you, she'll give the key. If not, I'll just get it next time. I told her I could conceivably take the boat down on Sunday, but I don't think I am. I got a lot of work to do down there, but maybe I could. If you see her this week, get the key from her, and I'll let you know. But it'll probably be after Mother's Day.
No, that's cool, man. I'm excited for you, man. It's gonna be cool.
Oh, I'm very excited. So we'll talk about it right here. Let's see, and we will get started. Are you guys good?
I'm good. Good as I'm gonna get.
Definitely as good as he's gonna get. All right, hold on. Let me get my stuff together here.
Good enough.
All right.
Turn that music on.
Here we go.
Oh, not wrong.
Bite Me Podcast is on the air, and we are recording live on the YouTube channel, and we will post this on Wednesday morning, which, by the way, that's shout out to Figgy Fig, our producer back at the mothership at Sports Radio 610. He's been posting it early on Wednesdays. I told him we got a lot of guys with the early commute that appreciate that. So it's been posting early on Wednesday. And of course, you can get it wherever you get your podcast, on iTunes, on Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcast. So you can get it first thing Wednesday morning, and I will share it everywhere on the group page, especially. Join the group page. Oh, quick little note here. We mentioned it a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, about all the new members. Man, I don't know if you've noticed, Scott, we've gotten a bunch of new members in the last 3 or 4 weeks, which is great, and we love it. We're probably pushing 8,700 members on the Bite Me group page. But just a quick little note, don't forget to click through, and the main thing is at the bottom when it says, do you agree with whatever the nonsense is that Facebook wants you to agree to? You definitely push agree, because if you don't agree, then you can't become a member. And so there is that to consider. That is,
and Camille goes through there and wipes everybody out.
Yeah. Just all the answers. And we kind of had some fun with it. Like it's when it says like, who are the hosts? You could put Captain Kangaroo. You could put anything, but at the very bottom, put that you agree. And we got some really interesting suggestions of who's hosting this podcast last time we did this. So I'll be looking forward to that if you're joining us. Captain Scott Knoll, you heard him a second ago. Joining us, as always, Captain Dean Thomas.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. He's joining us this week. And boy, do we have a story. I thought it was just something I hadn't seen. I don't think it was something that Captain Dean has seen. We're going to start right there when we get rolling now. We're talking all kinds of stuff today. The great dolphin debate. We can talk about Captain Caleb behind his back, which is always fun, and I don't think he minds. Scott, let me just. I'm convinced. And by the way, Captain Caleb might make a cameo. He's doing redfish bleep, as he likes to put it. I'm convinced, Scott, he does these things on purpose now. Like he does it for the gram, like the kids say. He just wants to post those pictures of no water under his boat, getting towed or towing people. And what do you like to say about Caleb? That boy?
Yeah, that boy ain't right.
That's what I was going to say. It's just his nature, man.
That boy ain't right.
I got a video yesterday that was funny as hell. He didn't post that one. I think he caught enough hell over the first one, but he just sent it to me off on the side, and it was just a video of him talking and he's sitting out there and he kind of swings it around 360 degrees. You can't see land anywhere. I don't know where the hell he's fishing. He's out in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere. And it just swings it around like that. And he's swinging around and he goes, yeah, out here, just kind of cruising along here. And check this out. And he shows the motor and he puts it in gear and guns it. He is literally, there is not a spot anywhere in the video. And he's stuck. He is stuck out in the wide open. I sent back to him. I said,
"Here
I
get
is,
stuck in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. That's pretty
he would get stuck in the middle of Gulf of Mexico."
Well, that's what I sent him. I said, "Business cruising across the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm stuck." He found the mountain
offshore today. Yeah, hey, I'm going offshore today. All right. Well, we'll get the airboat. We'll get the airboat ready.
I don't know what's wrong with him. I really don't. There's something wrong.
That boy ain't right.
Can't get
all right,
right.
Captain Dean.
Yes, sir.
So, first of all, thanks for taking me out for a few hours on Sunday. For those who were not listening before we hit the record button here, we're finally making the move. I figure after about 3 decades of being selfish and fishing wherever I want to fish, even though it's not the most aesthetically pleasing, or no offense, obviously, there's a lot of fun stuff to do in Sabine, a lot of fun stuff to do in Sargent, but the little lady likes to shop and go to the beach and do girly stuff and sit and watch beautiful water. So after 3 decades, I'm finally throwing her a bone, and we're going to move the whole Bite Me camp to Aransas Pass, beautiful Aransas Pass, Texas. So we're going to take I've been working on that the last couple of days. Going to take the trailer down there, getting it fixed up real good before I take it down there. Going to take the boat down there. I'm going to have a slip with the lift right about 12 or so spaces down from Captain Dean, so that'll be cool. We're going to take a whole.
So after how many years of marriage, it's not all about John anymore?
Yeah, and it's usually the other way around. Hey, she wins every fight but one. She wins every fight but one. And I think part of it is because she just wants me to get the hell out, to be honest. Oh, you're going to Sabine? Great. Oh, you're going to Sargent? Great. I'll be here. And so, but now with a brand new grandbaby that wants to play on the beach eventually, we're gonna go down there. What you got, Scott?
She ever said, "Don't hurry back"?
Oh, every time. Sometimes I call her on Sunday and the wind's blowing and I'm kind of tired. I think I'm just gonna come home early tomorrow. Oh, really? Why? Don't you want to fish in those back lakes? I don't know. I would be suspicious, but it's just she's too mean about it. So I think it's just me that she's talking about. It's nothing suspicious at all. But anyway, Captain Dean, appreciate it going out with you. I'm going to be booking you to show me the ropes, because all my fishing growing up was down in Aransas Pass in Port Aransas, like all of it, all the way until I got to college when I was 18 years old. But wasn't out of a boat very often. My uncle had one, and occasionally I'd go out with him. So I need to learn that. Going to book Captain Dean, which we recommend to.
Man, we're going to bring all your sports friends down here, all them guys.
Oh, Kubiak's going to fish with us. We got to set that up in May or June. Yeah. He's going to fish with us.
He's been promising me that for 3 years, though, Dean. Careful.
We were talking about
3 years
the
of
other day about, everybody that he hangs out with. And I figured that it was an easier question to ask him who he didn't know, which there was nobody on that list that he doesn't rub elbows with.
Man,
go hobnobbing.
It's good work if you can get it.
It's a rough life, ain't it, man?
It's good work if you can get it.
Good work.
But, all right, so here's the topic that kind of slapped us in the face almost literally.
It presented itself.
It presented itself almost literally. And Dean, I'm going to toss it to you first and then get Scott's thoughts. But so we're fishing a flat, looking for some redfish. Didn't quite happen, but there was a lot of reasons for that. Big weather storm, a big windstorm the day before, up to 55, 60 miles an hour, in fact. So Dean says, well, let's go over here. Maybe we'll catch some trout. And there was a little drop off. We went over to, and sure enough, we start catching some trout. I mean, catching a lot of trout. It was a lot of fun. But about 15 minutes in, we see some dolphin. And we're like, oh, great. We've dealt with dolphin a bunch of times. So finally I catch a fish, another fish, and all of a sudden just starts pulling drag. And Dean,
those dolphin. So they came charging at us. It was crazy. It's like, so we see these dolphins off in the distance, and man, they just pushed a wake to us. So, and the way the day started out, we tried the flats, super low tide. Y'all talk about the dump and the tide up north on the north coast. When the north wind blows up there, it blows because of the curvature of the coast. The north wind has a crazy effect on the upper coast where it blows the water out. We had west wind here, and so which is very unusual for us, so it blew the tide very low. And the drop-offs, which are classic for speckled trout, high tide or low tide, we're fishing over there, and when it goes that low, it pulls the reds off the flats. And so we were catching trout, speckled trout. I mean, one after another, sometimes two at a time. And I made the comment to John just before that. I was like, we're going to mix in a redfish here in a minute. I said, this is classic. I said, there'll be some reds mixed in with these trout. Boom. He hooks a fish, and all of a sudden it just starts taking drag. It's pulling, but it wasn't dramatic like you would think it was a dolphin.
It was like a steady pull.
A 300-pound fish on there. But I guess it's a 300-pound mammal. Excuse me. But we're catching trout, and all of a sudden he gets a fish that's just pulling drag. But I got to kind of back up a little bit because the dolphins came to us. We're catching trout. We were trying to release them nice and quiet, slip them on the side of the boat where they didn't get to them. They didn't hear the splash. But these dolphins were sticking with us. But what was unusual about this dolphin encounter is that they were calculating what we were doing. We were casting at the tails of the dolphin, under the dolphin, and catching speckled trout within feet of the dolphin. But these dolphin were waiting for those trout to get hooked, and they would grab the trout that was still hooked. So the one that grabbed John's trout that was pulling, I mean, like a redfish, just slow and steady. And then all of a sudden it just let go. Trout comes in, it's just shredded. I posted a picture on the Facebook page of that one trout that was all chewed up. But they released it. They didn't pull any of them off the hook. They would grab them, tug them, but we came to the conclusion that dolphins were evolving to the next level of stealing fish from fishermen. They were waiting. They knew what was going to happen. They would kind of hover on the perimeter, and as soon as that fish got hooked, here they came. And we had 5 or 6 that did exactly the same thing. And then we moved down the shoreline a mile, and within a minute, here comes Flipper.
Oh, it was like they were barreling at us. I mean, they were going like they were in a water show. They were just coming right at us, backs out of the water. Just how they go, just one right after another. But Scott, it was like he said, like 5 or 6 trout in a row. We would hook one, and it, like that, it would just go, and they didn't like swallow it. It was almost they just had it like the whole trout in their mouth. It was as if they were waiting for us to bring it on board and then release it so they knew which one was weaker. It was the damnedest thing.
It was very calculated. It was. Oh Lord!
What's up, boys?
Okay, just hold on a second. Scott had a very hot
we're trying to be serious.
Scott has a very hot opinion, I feel, on our dolphin escapade from Sunday. But have you ever seen anything like that, Scott?
Yeah.
Really?
I've experienced the dolphin. It happens more around port than anywhere else. I mean, I haven't ever had it happen to me up here in Port O'Connor. I mean, I can't think of any where they consistently did it. I mean, one here, one there. Galveston never happened. But many, many times fishing around mud girls out there when they were little, and we were catching dink trout, and they were having a blast, and throw them over the other side of the boat. We were trying to do all kind of things with them, and they were all just, and girls wanted dinner. They wanted to catch their own dinner, so we kept trying. And They were just horrible. I mean, they wouldn't let any of them go. And then finally, we got one that like half, 3/4 of an inch over. Cool legal fish. And I picked it up and we measured it and I held it up. And got a picture with the girls. I threw it in the cooler. Flipper comes up and starts splashing the top of the water. Like, hey, what are you doing? You threw one in the cooler. What's up, man? They knew when we were putting the fish in the cooler, they would throw a fit. They would sit out there and splash and crash. It was pretty crazy. They're extremely smart.
It was the dangest thing. It was the dang. They were all. Just so you know, Caleb is joining us now. But Caleb, you came in after the discussion. We're catching a bunch of trout. Dolphin, they were all relatively young. What were they, about 4 feet, Dean? Probably 4 feet.
Oh,
maybe 5 feet.
They were juvenile style, but not babies.
And
there was no mama with them.
Juvenile delinquents.
No mama with them. Yeah. And they were grabbing the trout as we hooked them and just pull and drag. And it was the dangest thing I've ever seen. We'll take a step back since Caleb is in the passenger seat. I guess he's doing redfish stuff. But Caleb, we did mention, the non-water fishing escapade that you had. Explain yourself, young man.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of time to be on the show, but I figured that I needed to make time to come defend myself momentarily.
Yeah. Well, you can't, but go ahead.
Man, that Mississippi River does some wild stuff down here. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I had no idea.
Imagine driving through the middle of East Matagorda Bay and just stopping. Like that. I'm 1,000 yards from East Shoreline. I think Scott, I'll quote Scott. He said, I was just having a nice stroll through the Gulf of Mexico and got stuck. That's how it works down here.
Yeah. If you ever go fishing offshore, I'm going to call the airboat boat because you're going to get stuck.
Get them ready. I wasn't stuck for long, though. I think both of my situations have been 10 to 15 minute situations. So that's pretty good, I'd say.
Well, the problem is, and I'm going to, I didn't want to just talk behind your back. I'm going to say it right in front of you. I think you're getting to the point where you kind of like to do this stuff on purpose. Like the teenage girls like to do it for the gram. You're knocking trees down. I was telling Dean, you're like, good thing the tree stopped us. Yeah. Okay. Good thing.
I think the exact quote was, I'm glad that tree stopped us because that could have got bad. I had my cameraman with me in the boat, and man, I saw it coming. I was like, huh. And I fought it as much as I could, and I just looked at him. I was like, hey, hold on. Whack. And then we were good. No problem. Steve didn't like it as much.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Steve is a little traumatized still.
Most of the tree experience happened on the deck of the boat where Steve was.
Yeah, of course it did.
Steve been traumatized a long time.
Yeah, he don't fetch sticks no more.
I'm sure he doesn't. All right, I know y'all are. It looks like y'all are moving to another spot or coming back from the ramp. We're going to let you go.
We're on our way to Tractor Supply to get the parts for the crap we broke today.
Some tree trimmers. Get some tree trimmers.
I'm going to get some loppers. We're going to get some loppers
I know you're with Daniel, and I only have one question for Daniel. Just one question. That's it. Why? Why do you do this?
Why?
I knew that was the question. I knew it.
Because I'm the best he can do. I'm the fat girl at 2 a.m.
You are a 10. You are a 10 at 2, and Daniel is drunk off his ass.
I question Daniel's judgment calls regularly. They're a lot like whenever I decide if I'm going to run through something or not.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, because we get new listeners every week, you are one hell of a fisherman, and Daniel is one hell of a patient soul.
Oh, we had what we had today, Daniel, 20 over 8. Sure. We ain't gonna worry about how long they were, but by God, they were heavy.
Well, that's good. That's good. All right, my man. We will see you next week. Enjoy spending money.
Don't be talking about me while I'm gone.
Oh, we absolutely will.
Too
All
late.
right.
All right.
Y'all have a good one. Later.
All right, man. On that note, so Dean, I mean, you heard Scott. It's happened.
Am I wrong?
Happened.
Am I wrong when
No,
I
you're
say
not
he
wrong.
ain't right?
That
Okay.
boy ain't right. And Dean,
Right.
Dean was telling me, he goes, I really haven't been fishing with Caleb. I want to go fishing with Caleb. And I said, well, it is an adventure. It is always an adventure. And he's
We got a lot of
fisherman
trees
too.
down here, man.
Like, he'll be running into mangroves. He'll be
A lot of trees, a lot of sandbars.
all right,
When
so
he sent that
was
picture, the whole deck of the boat was full of stuff. I don't know if you saw
Yeah.
that one, Dean.
leaves.
I mean,
and
the whole
limbs and-
deck
Oh yeah,
was
I saw
full
the picture
of
Yeah.
limbs.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's doing.
But the thing about the dolphins though was they're always following the boat. They're always chasing released fish. But the way they were sitting and waiting for us to hook fish and biting them, that was kind of we came to the conclusion.
Well, we didn't believe it, Dean. You thought it was redfish. I
evolution
thought it was, I thought it was
dolphins.
redfish. And
Yeah.
then I'm sitting there and I'm like, I think that dolphin had my trout in his mouth. And you looked at me like, no way. And then we did 4 or 5 more in a row. I was like, oh yeah, that's what they're doing.
It was
wild.
not fighting like a 200-pound fish.
No, not at all.
Remember your buddy and his CDs over there when he paddled out pulling all the CDs? And
so that's another thing.
That was
John. I have
hilarious.
two friends, 2 kayakers that have actually been molested by dolphins.
Wait a minute.
Where they came and like physically banged into the kayak. One was in the daytime and then one was in the nighttime, which the nighttime one was kind of easier to explain because it was like a dead end channel where he was paddling up in there and the dolphins were coming out. But they didn't just pass him by and leave him alone. They actually went after him and just beat his kayak with their tails and like slid up on it, jumped out of the water and kind of attacked him. So I don't know.
They thought he was cute.
It's not safe out there, man.
They thought he was cute. All right, so this is the part of the program where we're gonna, we are absolutely all about, the places where we fish, the ecosystem, if you will. And I'll take the fall on this one, Dean, if you don't want to. But you had a buddy.
I'll take one for the team. I'm here.
You had a buddy that had a conversation with you on Saturday night about the water coyotes that I called the dolphins water coyotes. He was calling them coyotes. And obviously, let me preface it by saying we're kidding about this. But the conversation was something about like, they're just coyotes. There's probably too many of them. We should probably get rid of some of these dolphins. I'm like,
the entire conversation was prefaced with, "This is not going to be popular. This is not going to be a popular opinion." But the idea, the theory,
get a load of this, Scott,
is that the population of dolphins are exploding, that there's more than there ever was, and they're a very intelligent creature, and they eat a lot of fish. I mean, but it's nature, they were eating fish before we were catching fish. That's just what's been taking place out there. But the theory was that like on land, if you want to relate the dolphins to the coyotes or predators, that predators have to be, oh man, I got to choose my words carefully.
Keep in mind, we're kidding, and it wasn't us that said it. It wasn't us that said it.
Yeah, these are other people's words. But so it comes up in conversation that the predators that go unchecked do damage or over harvesting, overeating, other things. But his idea was to limit the dolphin population, and I said, you're absolutely right. This is not going to be a popular. It's not going to work. I was like, you better just move on from this one.
Go ahead,
I'm
Scott.
pretty sure that's a federal offense.
That's what I told Dean. I said, I think that's a federal
Yeah.
crime. I think that's a federal crime.
I don't even need to look that one up.
But they're so cute, man. I mean, they're just like little cuddly little flippers out there. You know, how can you be mad at them?
So part of this discussion, go ahead, Dean. I mean, Scott.
Yeah, they do that out in front of the fishing center all the time. I mean, they're constantly out in front of the fishing center showing off and doing stuff. As last year, I guess it was, I came in from one of my charters, and there's some northerners all hanging out there on the docks, and their husbands and wives are older, and all the wives are taking videos, and they got their phones up and they're videoing, and all the old men are sitting behind them, sitting on a bench drinking beer. And ladies are just oohing and eyeing, about these dolphins that are rolling and frolicking out there in the intercoastal. And I got off my boat right in front of them, walked up there. I walked by the old man. I said, so y'all's wives are into dolphin porn, huh? They looked at me and said, what? I said, because the ladies are saying, oh, they're playing. Look at them playing. I said, they're mating out there.
They ain't playing.
I said,
well, they're kind of playing.
Watch real close. Yeah, watch real close, and you can kind of tell. And the old men got such a kick out of it. And I said, just wait until they get back home. They start showing their friends, and then bring it up.
If you really want to entertain yourself, go to YouTube. You never know where the conversations are going to lead on this show.
That's what's great about it.
There is
dolphin porn.
There is a lot of dysfunction, sexual dysfunction in the dolphin world. There is, go search it, Google it for yourself.
Hey, you got my attention.
No,
you got my attention.
Google it.
That ain't going in my search history.
Okay, I can open up another screen here if you want me to. I can share the screen. I can share the screen with all.
That is not going into my search history. I'm sorry.
This is true.
That's admissible in court.
So, part of this is so coincidental because we had a question we didn't get to last week about, oh, guys, tell me about dolphin, yes or no, when you're fishing. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to ask you guys about it because the answer clearly is yes and no. Sometimes you see dolphin and it shuts everything down. Maybe you guys can share one thought real quick before we move on. And sometimes you see dolphin and you're going to catch trout and it's not going to affect a thing. I mean, right, Scott? I mean, it's yes and no. It depends on what the trout are thinking.
Yeah, I don't see it as a definite either direction. You just got to try it and see. And there's been many, many times I've sat there and caught tons of trout right by the dolphins. And then there's other times where a dolphin just swims by and kills a bite. And it's just hard to say what it's going to do.
Hey, we proved that theory on
Big time.
Sunday morning. We were catching them under their tail. And so what I tell people when the dolphins show up, because there's a lot of people have opinions about the dolphins. The dolphins are looking for the same things that we're looking for. They're looking for bait fish. They're looking for fish. And when we find areas that fish are congregated in, dolphins go to that area. But dolphins are tuned into people. They understand that people equal fish. And in my area down here, I mean, there's just a lot of them. They have people they have the dolphin watch boats that go out of Port Aransas like crazy. There's a huge industry of looking at the dolphins. People love to see them. But when you're out there fishing, they are looking for the same thing we're looking for. They're in the areas where fish congregate. So there's a lot of dolphin interaction. I don't have a problem with it myself. I don't mind fishing around them.
All right, let's move on to the next topic here. First of all, before we do that, Scott, I thought you had a great comment on the Bite Me group page, which we always encourage people to join. There was a really dangerous offshore lesson, so to speak, and I thought you had a real good point about this. It was actually a very impressive job by the captain and whomever was on the boat with him. They ended up having to get rescued or I guess escorted back into their marina or the dock or whatever. But this all could have been avoided no matter how good a captain you are, right?
Yeah, right now is the time of year when you can get caught out there. And if you see if it's unstable weather, there's a front coming. You can't rely on the forecast of the front. It's just plain and simple. Some of them speed up, some of them slow down, some of them stall out. I was watching that on radar just because I was working outside and I had a bunch of stuff outside, and I was doing some exterior work, and I started seeing some reports of 50, 60 mile an hour winds in South Texas as that front was coming through. So I started looking at it on radar, and you could see the bow. There was a straight line, typical front, everything coming.
Really?
And there was this big bow in one section of it that was coming right across towards Corpus and South Texas. And anytime you see that front get a bow where it pushes out ahead of it like that, then that area right there has got some extreme winds in it. There were some winds reported down in the valley that were 114 miles an hour, just straight line winds.
Yikes.
I mean, it got pretty serious. Around here, I clocked them over 60, and I saw it coming, so I put all my stuff up. The point being, these guys, I mean, they're obviously experienced. They've got a big boat. They knew you don't just up one day wake up and say, I'm leaving out of Port Aransas and I'm going to run down to this rig that's 180 miles south of here. They've got experience with it. They know what they're doing. And it just kind of surprised me that they took a chance on that with that front coming.
Well,
they did the right thing. They tried to go back to port, going back into port. They went sideways to it. Instead of trying to get back to Port Aransas, they went, and that's where they found them. They were taking on water. They just went straight in. That rig, Perdido, that son of a gun is 120 miles east of Port Isabel. It's 180 miles south of Port Aransas. So I mean, it's out there, dude. I mean, that's a damn long ways to be fighting 8-foot waves and 60 mile an hour winds.
And
what it was, somebody posted that it was luck. That they got lucky. There's some luck involved. Obviously, anytime you survive something like that, there's a little luck involved in it. But there's a hell of a lot of skill that was involved in that too. Skill and a whole lot of, some people were saying guts or whatever, but it doesn't even come down to that. It just comes down to keeping your head straight and knowing what you're facing and not panicking. Panic's what's going to get you killed. So just don't panic.
And
Go ahead,
I read your reply or your recommendation, Scott, and there's no reason. I mean, everybody knew that was coming. There were warnings days in advance. In this day and age of technology and predictions, you should not be caught in that. The boat wasn't big enough, because look at the end result, and the risky behavior. I mean, there's no reason to get caught in that anymore. You have it in the palm of your hand. You have the wind that is live. You have radar that's live. If you wait too long, you waited too long. So.
Yeah. Well, my thing,
according to them, their plan was to come back in on Friday. They were going to come back in Friday night. That thing was supposed to hit Saturday. Sometime Saturday. Well, it sped up. And that's what happens with these fronts this time of year. The springtime fronts are the most dangerous fronts we get, because they will do that. They'll speed up and just blast through. And that's what that one did. It blasted through 6 to 8 hours earlier than originally predicted, and with a whole lot more wind than it was predicted to have. So they had a plan. I mean, their plan didn't work. You and I have seen that. Look at them funny clouds.
We have been involved in that. But
some funny looking clouds.
That was the era of flip phones. It wasn't iPhones.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
right.
we were much. I mean, I got caught in it in Galveston 2 or 3 times, in the 80s, Hell, we didn't have anything but, watch Channel 13 in Houston. And he says, well, it's going to be windy and there's a front coming. We think it'll be here, sometime tomorrow. And that was about the best you got. And then you look up and there it is.
There's a time to push the limits, and then there's a time to err on the side of caution. 180 miles offshore requires more caution than the flats.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So you need a much bigger cushion.
God, but just thank God everybody was safe, had a great ending, and lesson learned to a lot of people. An example, use it as a learning experience.
Even if you just watched it from where we're sitting.
That's exactly. A lot of people saw that, and hopefully it affects their decisions in the future.
And Scott, you alluded to this, but this was going to be my kind of just contribution to see what you guys are saying, especially in the spring. You always call them weather guessers instead of weather forecasters. But in the spring, It truly can be a guess because it'll change like that.
Yeah, I got to know one of the local weather guys in Houston through a friend of mine. He and I got talking at a party, and he told me flat out, and he had been doing it years and years and years. And he said the Texas Gulf Coast is known in the meteorology world as one of the most difficult places to predict the weather because we have that giant thing of the Gulf of Mexico right there. We've got super dry land in West Texas and South Texas. And the two combine to make weird weather and very unpredictable weather. You don't know if the moisture is going to push in from the Gulf and the dry air line and all. He went in, he geeked on it. I mean, and I'm a weather geek. He went way over my head, but his basic thing was it's really hard to predict, even with all the computers, even with all their sophisticated stuff that they do. They're still going to be off. Like right now. They're saying 80% chance of rain at my house right now. It is not raining at my house.
Literally right now.
Yes, it says 80% chance of rain because I was kind of concerned because I got a bunch of insulation sitting on a trailer out back that I just brought home, and I was looking at it, and then I see 80% chance, and I was like, oh, crap. So I pull up the radar, and there's not a blip of a rain anywhere around me. Yeah. So it's really hard this time of year.
Man, if it wasn't for weather girls, I wouldn't watch any of that.
Especially my people. I
love the weather in Houston, man. The news in Houston is amazing.
It's next level. Just wait till you go to Monterey or Mexico City and see what it looks like.
Oh, I don't even understand the word they're saying, but I love to watch it.
Boy. No, you're not wrong. That's for sure. All right, we're going to get back on the good graces of all the environmentalists now. we were in the doghouse for a second there, but back in the good graces because there's been this big push. And Scott, I'm going to start with you again because I know this is in your wheelhouse, but Dean, you probably have a great perspective on it as well about these not even artificial reefs per se, but regenerating reefs. We talk a lot about oysters up in the mid coast and upper coast, not quite as much down on the lower coast, but lots and lots of more organization, lots and lots more fishermen and CCA and Texas Parks and Wildlife Department people are really getting behind more man-made structures per se. Such as restaurants, with the oyster shells. It's such a big industry, conserving them and going and working with other organizations to reintroduce them to bay systems. Obviously, Dean does such a fantastic job with mangroves, and maybe more people, after listening to the podcast are doing that. The question was that I got, and this was not necessarily a DM, it was a buddy of mine that texted, said, well, okay, does that create more oysters, and how long until those sort of man-made structures start producing fish? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Really?
It's immediate. They've done some studies on it, especially out in Florida, where they do a whole lot of the man-made reefs. They sink old boats and things like that. We're doing more of that along the Texas coast now. There were some studies done on it, and literally within hours, they had fish on these structures. It happens really quick. So I would imagine that the man-made ones, if they're attracted, then a man-made one out of natural materials such as oysters would attract them immediately. As soon as things settle down, as soon as the noise and the commotion involved with setting up the reef, I would imagine within 1 or 2 tides, the water clears up and the fish are there. As far as the baby oysters, that's a matter of whether the spat gets on it, and that's Mother Nature taking over there. But the oysters have to have some kind of substrata to latch onto, and they can't just latch on the mud. And so that's the whole reason for dumping the oysters back in there. Is that's one of the best things for baby oysters to grow on is other oysters, and so it's a great base for it. And I mean, you can look at anything that's out there. A thing of concrete sitting out there will have oysters growing on it in the right conditions. So anything that we can do man-made, I think it's going to help. Can't hurt.
Yeah, Dean. What about mangroves?
Caleb. It could hurt Caleb because he's going to run.
It can hurt Caleb. That's for sure.
Yeah, he's going to cut a boat trail through it. The mangroves offer some great structure. So over in St. Charles Bay, they have 2 areas where they've been dumping shell and some rubble and stuff to create some reefs. I missed a chance 2 weeks ago. I got invited to go with some scientists out of Goose Island and catch some fish on those reefs so they could tag them. They wanted to tag the fish on the reef. I ended up out of town that week. But there will be definitely some follow-up on that. My buddy Billy Trimble, who lives over here by me, it was somehow connected to Flatsworthy, which is another great conservation group. And they needed some other boats to catch some fish and tag. I didn't get a chance to do that. So there's going to be a lot of data coming back specifically to reefs and structure created in the bays. The stuff that's offshore has been done. I think the inshore in the bays is really new. I mean, it's kind of a great trend to create some structure there. I have another guy that I made contact with through the Flatsworthy. He's at the Texas A&M, Corpus Christi. They're sending me a tagging kit. I'm going to start tagging speckled trout also. That are caught here in Redfish Bay. And then when those fish are caught, that data will be recorded, and it's all a part of the process. I mean, there is a lot to learn about that, and it never ends. And the resource is under a lot of pressure from fishermen, from industry. And so in the grand scheme of things, it's
dolphins.
All very important.
Dolphins.
Dolphins.
I can honestly tell people now I caught a dolphin. I caught a dolphin.
Man, we should have got a picture of it hanging in the boga grip.
The big long snout. What does it say? I think it says 285.
It says let me go.
It says you're breaking the law. Exactly. So Dean, we've one of the great things I love about this podcast, not just talking about fishing and helping people catch fish, but some of these things, restoring reefs and mangroves and all that. I'm just curious, just as a side note, because we've talked about what you're doing with the mangroves. Have you gotten any feedback on that? You got any more people interested in wanting to do what you're doing and asking the right questions?
So Scott Hodge, who commented on the comments over here just a minute ago, he's a landscaping company here in Aransas Pass. When he heard what I was doing, he actually donated me some soil and pots for the seeds, the propagules that I have that are out here. So, the word is spreading. People want to be a part of it, and concerned citizens are out there. So a lot of our mangroves that they're coming back. They're coming back really strong. I've noticed in a lot of places. We didn't talk about that the other day when we were out there. I mean, we passed through a few areas that I noticed. that are looking really green. But right now is the time of year where those things really have the great conditions to grow, that they're sprouting in new areas and they're coming back strong. They should be dropping seeds this year. They didn't last year because they were so knocked down from the freeze. But it's a native plant. It has been through freezes in the past. It will recover, but it is a very slow growing plant.
Yeah, that's the difference between
and there are,
that and oysters.
I talked a couple podcasts back, about the guys over at the university that were growing, like, I think they had 1,700 mangroves that they were sprouting, that they were looking for places to put them back out there. So, there's a lot of effort to help that situation, but Mother Nature does her thing. She takes a beating and rebounds well. And it's another one of those things, whenever a severe event takes place, they tend to come back strong. They come back with effort. So, time will tell. What we need is a mild winter to give them a chance to rebound from that.
Scott, what about this question we have here about the mangroves might be encroaching on the salt marsh? And Dean, I know you have some thoughts on that, but I have no idea. I have no idea if that's maybe going to hinder some of the growth or not.
There's no doubt that it's encroached. When I first started coming to Port O'Connor many years ago, there was a whole lot more saltgrass and very few mangroves. Galveston had none. But when I left Galveston a few years back, quit guiding up there, mangroves were starting up in the marsh around Galveston. I'm sure they got wiped out by this freeze, but there was quite a few growing. It always kind of surprised me to be in the Galveston marsh and be pulling around back there and all of a sudden see a mangrove popped up. You just kind of wonder where the hell it came from. But South Louisiana's full of them.
It came from who knows where, because those things float a long way.
However you feel about the whole global warming thing, our climate's shifting. It's it's getting warmer. We're seeing snook further north. We're seeing mangroves further north. All of that's just incremental movement, and that's what we have to look forward to in the future. As far as the saltgrass, honestly, I prefer saltgrass to the mangroves as far as red fishing goes. Along the upper coast and the middle coast, the saltgrass seems to produce more shrimp, and the shrimp seem to be thicker around the saltgrass than they do around the mangroves. But if the mangroves are going to take over, they're going to take over. There's not a whole hell of a lot we can do about that. So, and they do provide great structure.
Definitely some controversial opinions on the mangroves, but that was before the freeze. There were conversations around the wildlife refuge, the Aransas Wildlife Refuge, how mangroves had spread so much into the lakes that they were choking out some of the grass, that it was changing the landscape over there. I was talking with some of the scientist folks at the university in Port Aransas. I know you're an Aggie, John. You probably you support the Aggies. These are Longhorns over here.
That's all right. As long as they're helping, they'll get their masters at A&M.
But they were actually, we were talking about some cuts that had been created by boats, and so they wanted to put some natural habitat in there to block it up and create it. I mentioned mangroves. They were very much against planting more mangroves. They were supporting the grass. They wanted the spartina and the grass to be there because the mangroves were kind of overtaking that. And so when you talk, global warming, it is what it is. The sea levels are rising. I look at the chart every single day, 10 times a day, on what the tide is doing. The tide is above normal. The tide is higher than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. These charts were created by recording the data every single day. The tide is higher. One of the concerns is that as these tides increase, will the vegetation that grows at the shoreline, will it recede and continue to grow as the tides rise? Or will they be overtaken by the higher water? Because they're designed to grow at the water's edge, at the very fringe of that edge. And anybody can go out to the bay. You can look at the fringes of the water. There's very specific habitat that grows in those areas. So as the water levels rise, and that's one thing that there is no doubt. I mean, the water levels are rising. It is high. There's very few days with the extreme low tides. We have more days with a lot of high water. Don't want to create a whole nother can of worms. My observation from being out there every day and looking at those charts. But man, I can get a lot of conversation going on that subject.
No, I love it. I love it.
The question is, will those plants advance? Will they move up and continue to thrive as the water levels increase? There's a lot of people out there doing studies on that, on these very shallow lakes, like beyond the backside of St. Joe Island, where it comes to Vincent Slough and Spalding and those areas. As these waters are flooding that vegetation more and more, will they move back or will they not survive? So,
and great transition, because let's talk a little fishing now. Compare the actual fishing to, because these are all very important topics that every fisherman loves to talk about and have an opinion about. But Scott, before we get to that, I do want to mention, or speaking of our listeners, that reminded me, the Bite Me 20 combo that you can get 20% off on Knock and Tail soft plastics at knockandtaillures.com. Same thing with Wade Wright, the Wade Wright belt. I was just texting with Tim today about that. That's still going for the Bite Me combo, 20% off. These are great, man. I mean, these are great. This is what makes me very, very happy to be doing this podcast, that we all our community gets to benefit with that just by listening. And that's at coastalfishinggear.com for the Wade Wright belt. But Scott, I'll start with you. And we may go a little long on this podcast. I don't like to go too long, more than an hour, but I think this is interesting because, so we're talking, oysters and regenerating. And he was just talking, this is what I want to focus on, about the edges and grass versus mangroves. Well, if I'm out on the water, I'm thinking about, okay, what did Dean say? And what did Scott say? How does that affect, how you're fishing, Scott? Like you're out there all the time. Dean's out there every day. How do we help our listeners to all of a sudden formulate a game plan with all that?
If it's shrimp season, like in the fall, when I'm looking for the shrimp up against the grass, Dean fishes it more out in the open, the way his bay is set up. I still fish a lot of the edges, and we have a whole lot of creeks and little back lakes and things like that. I look for the ones that have more salt grass than mangroves. And those are fewer and farther between around here than they are in Galveston and a little further up the coast. But I've always found more shrimp around the salt grass. So when I'm counting on the shrimp and counting on the redfish to be on the shrimp, I want to find some salt grass. I've got some areas here that's it's not predominant by any means, but there are a lot of patches of the Spartina grass, and I'll kind of concentrate on those, and I watch them throughout the year. When the shrimp are little, like right now, I go through and I hit it with my push pole as I go by, and I see how many shrimp jump out of the salt grass. I kind of file that away, in the back of my mind. Okay, this area is holding a lot of shrimp, and I hit some others and hardly. Okay, those areas aren't holding a whole lot of shrimp. I'm not going to concentrate on those as much as the shrimp get older. I do it with the mangrove some, and I'll see some. It's smaller shrimp. Generally, once the shrimp get up to a little bit of a size, they don't hang around the edge of the mangroves as much as they do on the salt grass. So if they're on mullet, yeah, I'm going to be hanging out around the mangroves a little more, because there's some hiding places inside those mangrove roots, and the little fish go up inside there and to get away, and the game fish know that. So they're going to prowl the edge of the mangroves for that. But typically, if I'm looking for shrimp, I'm looking for grass. If I'm looking for, if I think they're more on mullet and crabs, then I'm going to look more at the mangroves.
And the tide dictates my game plan for the day.
Mhm.
Always interesting to compare the upper coast with the lower coast. We have flats, we have vast, endless, shallow grass. So chasing that range of tide is how I plan my day. Like I said, I look at it 10 times a day, constantly watching what the tide is going to do, where it was 12 hours before I went fishing, where the water was before we head out. Because even if the tide comes rushing in about 6 hours, those areas back in those corners didn't have water in there 6 or 8 or 12 hours ago. But that changes, week to week and month to month. Sometimes we'll have a real flatliner where the tide doesn't change a lot. And then you have days where it shifts very dramatically. You have weather events that push that water around. But on the flats of South Texas, I'm always looking for that range of water that is just as shallow as I can get in to fish and look for fish. And it's not as tuned into shrimp here as it is on the upper coast. We look for mullet, we look for bait fish, a lot of finfish activity opposed to the shrimp. I know right now, I mean, I've seen the pictures, I've seen my buddies up on the upper coast, and they're just, chasing birds like crazy right now that got shrimp popping out of the water. And we just don't see that down here in my part of the world. So planning the day or planning where you're going to go and start looking for fish, to me, is all based on the level of the tide, the range of that tide today. So when you look at the NOAA tide gauge, it comes down to experience too. Okay, so the tide is here today. What flat is going to be favorable to drift or wade, or kayak, however you want to do that? That water level is what I'm looking for.
All right. It's funny you say that, because one more kind of offshoot of that, Dean, from before we get to what would Dean do, what would Scott do, because you were when we were fishing, and I was telling you, and you knew this already, but I was telling you about moving down there. You were kind of reconditioning me on some of the things that I do, which you do a lot when people come up from the north or out of state. We have a lot of listeners out of state. We have a lot of listeners all over the Texas Gulf Coast and Florida and Louisiana. And I thought that was interesting. And it's a perfect transition, because, Scott was talking about the edges. You were telling me, I don't really fish the edges that much, whatever, this time of year or whatever. You asked me what line I was throwing, and I said 30 pound, the line. And you're like, I'd go with 10 or 20. And then, you were talking about the tide, and I'm, obviously I watch the tide and the wind, but you're more wind driven as well. So let's talk about that, like lower coast sort of reconditioning yourself from, like, I'm dealing with oyster shell where I fish right now. So I got a heavier line. I mean, I can cast it, but down there, Dean, you want to cast more distance. You want to cover more ground.
And you noticed immediately at the first drift when we pulled up, of course, you started casting towards the island, towards the shoreline.
Sure did.
And I told you to direct your attention in the other direction.
Look to your left. Look to your left.
Yes. And I also told you, I says, when I have guys that come down and fish with me from the upper coast, I have to keep the boat away from the shoreline to keep them from being tempted to throw at it.
Yeah.
And get them tuned in to throwing at the sand holes. So what the fish are looking for lives on the bottom. They live in the seagrass. They don't require shorelines to have what they're looking for. So if it's a barren mud flat, the little creatures have to stick to the shoreline, because as soon as they get away from that shoreline, they're vulnerable. But out on, our flats, we have this lush seagrass that is full of sand holes. And we talked about the contour too. Also, I told you, I said, we're going to move out to deeper water. And then I also mentioned, I said, deeper water, maybe 6 inches deeper.
Yes.
It changes very gradual. But it's a different habitat. It's a different world. And the fish do roam the open flats, which is why we set up drifts that can be easily a quarter of a mile, sometimes a half a mile, where every cast has potential to catch that fish.
And then the line, like I said, I always have the 30-pound braid because I'm dealing with oyster shell and other stuff, and I'm going to have to rethink that and go a little lighter for the distance part of it.
And another interesting thing that we talked about when we were out the other day, so the big wakes, the big reds that we saw that were pushing wakes, when you spook a fish in the crystal clear water, that fish is aware of you. It saw you. It knows where you were. This is a very, very difficult, almost impossible fish to catch. In the marsh, in the very muddy water, you see pushes and you see swirls. You throw into that swirl, that's a caught fish. The reaction in the clear water compared to the dirty water is 100% different. It is a whole nother reaction. So I completely disregard the spooked fish that see the boat or see me. Once they're fleeing from that, you could throw at it all you want, entertain yourself, but it is very unlikely that fish is going to bite. Where in the marsh, you see swirls and pushes, you throw in there, boom, that's a hookup. So we're gonna got to get you rethinking,
reprogrammed. And Scott, yeah, I got to reprogram myself. And Scott, that's kind of like why I admire big time tournament fishermen, because you do have to make those adjustments everywhere. And just from where you are in Port O'Connor, I'm guessing you get a little bit of both, and so you kind of have a whole different approach when it comes to gear and where you're throwing, etc.
Yeah, I can still fish the way I did on the Upper Coast in a lot of places, and then I fish more like Dean does in other places. It varies throughout the year, and sometimes it varies throughout the day. And there's times when they'll be snuggled up next to the shoreline, and you can't peel them off the shoreline. That's the only place they're going to be. There's other times they're way out there in the middle of the wide open, and there's really no rhyme or reason to it a lot of days. And tide's the same, wind's the same. Today they're on the shorelines, tomorrow they're out in the open. It makes things kind of interesting, but you guys got to do a little more exploring around here than you do. Upper Coast, I knew where I was going all the time. I mean, I had it down. I knew day in, day out exactly what my fish were going to be doing. They were more consistent. Dean's fish are more consistent. These around Port O'Connor, not as consistent. I mean, they'll throw you a curveball. I mean, I've had them in days where they were just, tailing like crazy, schooled up, tailing all out in the open, middle of the open flats. And then the sun got up about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and they all went to the edges. I couldn't tell you why. Conditions didn't change that much. All it did was get a little brighter.
Yeah. All right. So what would Scott do? What would Dean do? I'm looking at this, Dean, and I'm seeing a little bit of windy weather coming up Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but nothing that seems, at least from what I'm looking at, too out of the ordinary, and coming out of the south and southeast. So I'm guessing you have some good thoughts on what you would do this weekend.
Man, it's just turning into, once we get past April, it's very consistent. It's southeast every day. 13 to 15 to 20 is normal for us, especially in May. The thing about me is we don't have an in-between season. It just goes from windy to hot. And and once you get to June, you're going to have very calm. Well, June, July, and August is all very similar. It's just flat calm in the morning, and then it'll just slowly increase as the day goes on, and it's going to be 15 or 20 in the afternoon. Scott was talking about that earlier. We have a desert inland, and as the desert heats up in the daytime, the air rises and it draws cool water from the Gulf. It's a big machine. It's a wind machine. So it's going to be very consistent. I love this time of year. You know what to expect. The tide, now you start to deal with the moon phases. You have during the January, February, the moon is there. It does what it does, but it doesn't affect my thought process as much. As we get to this time of year where things are consistent, the week before the new moon, the week before the full moon is going to have some really fluctuating tides. It's going to have more variety in the tide. The new moon and the first quarter, full moon, third quarter is going to have real flat tides. But that's consistent for 3 months. I mean, you just have that rhythm to where things are going to be very consistent. But I love it. I mean, you get out there early, you get the first 2 or 3 hours of the morning where things are going to, you really can see bait. You can see the signs that are moving in the water and figure those things out. I'm going to hit the shallows early, the grass beds, throwing top waters. And then as the day moves on, we're going to move to the drop-offs around the deeper edges of the flats and change to soft plastics and start probing the depths. It's consistent is the best way to describe that, because you're going to have southeast breeze every day for the next 3 months.
All right, Scott, how about lower middle coast where you are?
Looks like 10, 15, maybe getting up into the low 20s east. Go drift. Go do your drifting. Go work shorelines. If you want to plant yourself on a shoreline and wait it, put the wind at your back and just ease down the shoreline in a group and do your fence post thing. Have a guy staggered out about casting distance apart. Work your way down the shoreline. The trout should be along those edges, and the drop-offs and reds should be light. Weather's not going to be a concern this week. It's supposed to be starting to get warm and light winds, not light, but light enough, light enough for safe fishing and comfortable fishing. I've got a trip on Friday that the guys want to go out to the jetties and see about getting on some big bites. So we're going to go look, see if we can find some bull reds and some jacks. They should be around the jetties. I don't think, the tarpon shouldn't be here yet. Still a little early for that, but we'll go look, check out the rocks. I think it's going to be a little too windy to be on the beachfront itself, but we'll be just inside the bay from the jetties.
All right. It's an open pallet. Fun show, man. A lot of laughs today. That's for dang sure. But really appreciate you guys. Slowrideguide.com. I know you guys are booked up, but if you do want to get a hold of Dean, slowrideguide.com. Anything else you want to share before we get out of here, Dean?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on, message me on Facebook. My website is actually down at the moment. I had a lot of outdated data on my website from it had been there for too long. So social media is where you can find me. Message me on Messenger. The phone number we got on the Facebook page. I have Slow Ride Guide Services there. You can find me there. So the social media is the best way to call me.
And what's happening in your world other than the house? It must be coming along pretty good. You're taking trips again here, Scott. Plus the weather's better.
Taking some here and there. Yeah. I'm can kind of see the finish line. Our electrician buddy that's on the podcast that listens regular, Mr. Matt Parrish, said he insisted he's going to come down first wiring this thing up. So we'll have all the wiring done and on to sheetrock after that. I just bought all the insulation today.
That's seeing the finish line right there. That's seeing the finish line.
Yeah.
And then you get
all
kinds of
appliances.
You get all kinds of help painting and stuff.
But and so earlier in the up in the top, we need to visit the desal plant. I enjoy the scientific conversation about the bays and what's going on. It relates 100% to the fishing that we do. As the show was starting, we had some questions way back at the top of the comments.
I'll go through them
about that, and we should definitely visit that in the future.
I'm writing it down. What is it?
The desal plant, desalination. that's coming to our area. And just, all of the pressure on the resource just in general. I always enjoy the scientific conversation that goes with the marsh restoration, the reefs, and all those stuff. So appreciate all the feedback from the guys out there.
Yeah, and always good hearing from you and Scott on those types of topics as well. All right, guys. Really, really, really appreciate you hopping in. I'm thinking Caleb will be back next week. But until then, guys, Captain Dean, Captain Scott, don't forget to join the group page, subscribe to the podcast, and catch them up. We'll talk to you next time. How about that?